Hello and welcome to week 3. This week we will be focusing on spirituality in early childhood education. For our agenda, we are going to spend some time talking about spirituality, what it is, how it has been defined in the literature. We also are going to look at some theories that have been developed on children's spirituality. We're going to talk a little bit about how do we navigate the separation of church and state that we have governing our school settings here in the U.S. And then we're going to move into how does it look like in the classroom? What are some things that we could do? What resources are out there? And I'm going to end it with asking you to think upon and reflect on your own definition of spirituality. And then that's going to be the discussion board activity for week 3. We're then going to move into EdTPA Task 1, highlighting what aspects of Task 1 you should be working on right now and asking you to continue to work on these on week 3. And then point you to meditation technique number 3, which has been recorded, and it's available to you on Blackboard and on my website, and you can listen to it there. And then highlight the homework for this week and some things that you need to be completing before Sunday when the module closes. Okay, so before we get into the definition of spirituality, I want you to think for a minute or two, and you can pause the video and think about this. What does spirituality mean to you? How would you define it? If you had to explain it to someone, what would you say? What is spirituality from your personal perspective? So think about that. And then once you've done that, let's get into the different perspectives of defining spirituality that we can find in the literature. So spirituality, defined as different from religion or religiosity, has been construed in different ways by scholars in the literature. Some of them think that spirituality is an innate human essence, capacity, ability that is just part of being human. So it's human nature. Others think that spirituality is something that exists outside of humans. And it's something that humans interact with, but it's not innate to them. It's not part of who they are. It's not in their essence. It's outside of them. And others combine these two notions into their definition and propose that spirituality is both an innate human capacity or ability, part of their essence, and also exists outside of them with which they connect and relate. Other group of scholars define spirituality as essence and consciousness. So they look at what happens in a particular point in time and how the consciousness in humans relates to that spiritual experience. Others just focus on the experience itself and say that, or define spirituality as a direct sensory awareness or direct sensory experience that requires awareness from the human, right? So we have in this next slide a compilation, and this is on my book from 2015, in which I compile from the literature the different definitions of spirituality from a non-religious perspective. So here you have spirituality as human nature, spirituality as unifying with something other, and then a combination of spirituality as human nature and otherness. And then those who define spirituality as essence, consciousness, and direct sensory awareness. And you find that if you're interested in reading on these particular perspectives, the references are there for you to check out. So when I present my work, because I'm coming at spirituality from a non-religious perspective, And when I ask people about their spiritual background or how do they define spirituality, a common question that I get asked is, well, are you referring to religion or religiosity? Is that what you're asking me about? And the direct answer to that, the simple answer is no. I'm not referring to religion. But then I would need to specify then what is it that I'm referring to, right? And so I typically present the two definitions so that we can understand what religion is versus what spirituality is or isn't in comparison to religion, right? And this image is from my second book on children's spirituality, in which religion is the fishbowl in which the fish is living in, and spirituality is the water that could be inside that fishbowl or could be outside that fishbowl. And the fish is the human, right? So as a human being, you could live your spirituality, experience it, develop it from a religious perspective inside the confines of this fishbowl, or you could live it outside of the religious confines and just interact directly with it without the parameters, guidelines that are provided by religion, right? So the image is in the book, but it was designed specifically to help people visualize what I mean with spirituality without having to get into the text. But if we're looking at the text, religion, as defined, dictionary definition, so very basic, straightforward definition, is a set of beliefs and practices that is generally held by a human community. So a group of people that come together and that hold similar beliefs and similar practices. And these beliefs and practices that manifest themselves perhaps in daily rituals are governed by a set of guidelines. And so they adhere to sort of a code of conduct because of the dogmatic tenets of the particular religion that they're part of, right? So these group of people come together, they share the same beliefs, they abide by the same rules or codes, and they then practice in a similar way and carry out similar rituals. Spirituality, on the other hand, is an innate human characteristic or capacity that allows human beings to relate and connect with a transcendent or higher power or universe or God or whatever name we want to give it, that is beyond our minds, our emotions, in order to feel part of something greater than ourselves. But it doesn't depend on a particular code of conduct. It doesn't need a group or a community to be experienced or developed. And it doesn't necessarily have to share the beliefs and the practices with others. It can be a very individual and personal experience. So with that, some views of spirituality in the literature that guide how scholars look into spirituality are this kind of dichotomous approach to it, right? So some scholars view spirituality as another area of development. So when we look at child development and we know that we have different areas, we tend to compartmentalize the child in these different areas of development and study them separately, although we know that the child is a unity and all of these different areas of development form part of who the child is. But we tend to study cognitive development, social emotional development, language development, and within language literacy. And so we focus on reading, we focus on writing specifically, we focus on oral language. And we have the physical component, and there also we focus on fine motor development and gross motor development. And we know from this perspective that the child goes through stages in each of these areas of development. As in time, development, learning happens, the child progresses and advances in these stages. So some scholars consider spirituality as another area of child development. And those would be that developmental area, compartmentalized kind of view of spirituality. There are another group of scholars who have a more humanistic approach to understanding children's spirituality, and think that, or propose that, spirituality is the essence, the core, the everything that a human being is. And they look at it then from a holistic perspective, and term spirituality then as sort of an overarching umbrella term that encompasses everything and anything that humans are capable of doing. So instead of seeing it as another area of development, they see it as the human being being developed in any of these areas, but as a whole, as the sum of all of these different aspects. So that is the holistic view. And I particularly position myself in this wholeness, holistic view and understanding of spirituality. But then another question that comes up is, well, how is then spirituality different from social emotional development or moral development or ethics of care, right? And so I explain it this way. I take spirituality as this overarching umbrella term that encompasses everything else that we know that have a similar definition or fall under a sort of similar category than where we would position spirituality. So spirituality would be the umbrella term under which character education and the work of Nell Noddings, for example, would fall under. Virtues, values, moral development, and everything that happens with ethics of care and just the development of an ethical human being. Then the aspects of social and emotional development, including emotional intelligence and social intelligence, would fall under this as well. There have been some authors that have looked into spiritual intelligence. Although, if we understand, if we read the literature on spirituality, we quickly understand that we're talking about not the physical material aspect of being human, but the spiritual soul aspect of being human. And the materialistic paradigm in which we've understood the world doesn't lend itself to create instruments to help us measure. Even measuring is a task of the materialistic perspective of understanding the world. It just doesn't lend itself to be applied to spirituality, to be able to measure it or calculate it or track the trajectory of increased stages of developments in the spiritual realm. To me, that just it doesn't make sense to try to apply the materialistic paradigm to a phenomenon that is not of the materialistic realm. And so these authors are there, they're presenting their theories, and they're trying to apply this materialistic perspective or paradigm of understanding the world to spirituality. to me, spirituality is beyond that, and it's sometimes ineffable, sort of very difficult to define, but it's also very difficult to measure. And thus, I would not necessarily spend my time as a researcher trying to measure spirituality. Instead of, I would prefer to invest my time and searching ways in which we can nurture it and support it without necessarily having to measure what increases or what improvements we've made on a particular scale that is going to determine if spirituality, if we were on level 1, how do we get to level 5? And how do we get to level 5 in the quickest and most efficient way possible, which is typically how we've measured and valued learning and education in general, right? So I would try to veer from that, and I have in my research, but it's out there, and I just wanted to share with you that literature exists and it is available. So my perspective on spirituality is a secular perspective. It's defining spirituality beyond the confines of religion or religiosity. So secular spirituality is defined as the adherence to a spiritual philosophy without adherence to a religion or to a religious understanding of life. Secular spirituality emphasizes personal growth and inner peace of the individual rather than a relationship with the divine. So it's more about personal gains and personal understanding and a sense of inner peace than necessarily a relationship with a divine, a God, or an external entity outside of us as human beings. So secular spirituality is composed of the search for meaning outside of religious institutions. So making meaning of life and understanding why are we here. It considers one's relationship or a human being's relationship with the self, with others, in our relationship with those around us, right? With nature, and whatever else one considers to be ultimate, divine, transcendent, spiritual. Often the goal of secular spirituality is living happily, is having a happy, fulfilling life in community with others. So helping and serving others, both for their happiness and their well-being, but also because in the service to others, we realize and we attain happiness and well-being ourselves. So the definition that I work with is an innate human potential or ability to be fully present, to connect with ourselves, with others, and with the greater other with capital O that is intangible and is beyond us, which some of us call the transcendent or the divine, others refer to as energy or spirit or universe, others call it God or goddess. And this connection, this relationship with this spirit affords us the possibility to relate or be in relation with that spiritual realm of which we are part of, but of which we are made of as well, and move toward finding meaning and direction in life as we then rediscover or remember our purpose as human beings. So this is the definition that I'm working with when I talk about spirituality. When I ask people, what is your spiritual background? How do you live and express your spirituality? How do you nurture your spiritual development? I'm coming from this standpoint of a secular perspective that is very personal and individualized, and yet it is very much about the connection to those around us, to nature, and to the spirit realm. So what other theories are there that are also from this sort of secular lens, but looking at children's spirituality in particular, right? So we have these two authors, Tobin Hart, which is one of the authors of the books that we're reading, The Secret Spiritual Life of Children is the book of Tobin Hart. And in that book, he talks about 5 spiritual components that make up children's spirituality. So he talks about wisdom, wonder, connections, wondering or posing these big questions, and he talks about the invisible. And he says that each of these 5 paths these 5 components are ways in which children manifest and express themselves spiritually. He terms his book the spiritual or the secret the secret spiritual life of children. I'm looking for the book here because I have it in my library here next to me. But he terms it secret because he realized that children came to a sort of an aha moment when they, early on in their life, when they realized that some of these aspects that they're experiencing are negated by adults, and that some adults will either think that it's part of the fantasy life of the child or the imagination and will dismiss it or negate it. And so children quickly decide that adults are not the place or the people to take these experiences to. And they live their spirituality in secret, right? So that's why he termed this, he titled his book this way. But he says that these 5 components are present. And as you read the book, it's part of our readings we're going to begin reading this book this week. As you read the book, you'll see how he explains what wisdom is, or what wisdom children have that makes it evident that they're spiritual. The wonderings and the wonder that children bring to the world, like being in awe. The relationships or the connections that they make with others and how those nurture their spirituality. Then the big questions that they pose about life, about why we're here, what happens after we die, where do we go, so what is the meaning of being alive, and so on. And then the invisible, which has to do with sort of these mystical, magical experiences that children have that are inexplicable and that happen in this sort of fantasy invisible world that adults cannot explain. And when children share these with adults sometimes tend to dismiss them. And this is one of the components, or the component, that mostly shows up in the reason why children live their spiritual life in a secret way. David Elkins is another U.S. Psychologist, and he was a priest as well. Tobin Hart is also from the U.S. David Elkins, who developed a theory. He did a study with adolescents and discovered that from all the adolescents that he was studying, that there existed 8 different paths through which these adolescents lived their spirituality and expressed themselves spiritually. So he talks about the feminine, the arts, the body, nature, psychology, mythology, relationships, and the dark nights of the soul. So he said that any of these paths could be ways in which a human being, in particular adolescents, could experience spirituality and can potentially support, nurture, and develop themselves spiritually by fomenting or supporting or engaging in experiences that were in these paths. He said that typically the adolescents had a preference, so there was one path that was preferred versus the others, but there could be a combination of them, right? So there could be a person that thrived spiritually through relationships and relationships with others, but also enjoyed nature very much, and through engaging with nature had mythical and spiritual experiences. The study that Tobin Hart did was a retrospective study. So he didn't study children directly, but he studied adults and interviewed adults that recounted experiences of when they were children, or recounted the experiences of their children and what they had observed their children go through. And David Elkins did directly work with adolescents to develop his theory. But these are paths and components of spirituality that we can see in the children that we work with. Another study was done by Hay and Nye in the UK, in which they interviewed and observed children in schools. And the children that they were working with were ages 7 to 11 or 12. And what they discovered is that the children had 3 different levels or ways in which they expressed and experienced spirituality. They defined spirituality as a relational consciousness. So they think that spirituality is a product of a relationship between the child and either the environment or another child or an adult or themselves that takes them to a level of consciousness that is different from sort of a day-to-day consciousness. And so they call children's spirituality a type of relational consciousness. And within this relational consciousness, they found 3 different dimensions or characteristics in which the children made evident that they experienced or expressed spirituality. So there is awareness sensing, mystery sensing, and value sensing. So awareness sensing had to do with, or the components of it were here and now, tuning or being in tuned with the spirit realm, the flow, being a state of flow, and then focusing or hyper-focusing, being able to do that. So in these kinds of situations, facilitated this type of sensing that they called awareness sensing. Value sensing had to do with delight or despair, so very sort of opposite ends of the spectrum of emotions, so joy or sadness, delight or despair. Then ultimate goodness, or being in a sense of complete giving to others, being very aware of what others needed instead of focusing on individual needs. And then meaning or meaning making, that has to do with sort of understanding, giving meaning to the experiences that they're having. Mystery sensing had to do with states of wonder and awe, and then had to do with imagination, creativity, fantasy. And so we see that these domains or dimensions of children's spirituality have some similarities to the theories that were posed by Tobin Hart and by David Elkins, right? Some of them have to do with relationships. Some of them have to do with wonder and awe, or being in the flow, or the imagination and the invisible world from Tobin Hart, for example. There's some overlaps there, similarities in what these authors present. So another study, this one I conducted with kindergarten children, and this is from my book from 2015. I looked at kindergartens in their classroom, and I determined I wanted to see how children experienced and expressed spirituality in an educational setting, in a classroom, where the school was a private school, but it was a non-religiously affiliated school, very academically focused, in New York City. And it was a school that was in relation to the university. So there was a lot of academics whose children would go to this school. So again, it was very academically focused, very high-performing children in a high-performing school. So spirituality was not part of the curriculum, was not part of the mandates. Well, it's not part of the mandates anywhere in the U.S., but in particular in that school, it was not part of the educational model that the school was imparting, and definitely not part of the curriculum that the teachers were delivering. So what I found is I observed 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, kindergartners, in their classroom setting, and I collected data by observing the children, by doing one-on-ones with each of the children, by doing small group activities with the 4 children at the same time, using children's books and some art as props for conversations. I interviewed their parents. Some of them I visited their homes, and I interviewed the teachers on each of these 4 children. I interviewed the teacher and the head teacher and the assistant teacher. And with all that data, what I found was that each of these children were experiencing and expressing spirituality in slightly different ways. So for one of the children, joy was the way in which she manifested, experienced, and expressed spirituality. For another one, it was in the relationship with others, the things that she did for others, how she related to them, how she evidenced helping them, or sort of the empathetic notion of their relationship with them, with the children for their peers, other children in the classroom, with their adults in the classroom, with their parents, their families, their siblings. And for another child, it was about compassion and kindness, and how this came out in the relationships that they had with others, but with the people that they interacted on a daily basis. And then for one child, it was about creativity and imagination, and how this played out in everything this child did. So if we look at David Elkin's paths, we could say, okay, these could potentially be paths through which younger children, because David Elkins was working with adolescents and I was working with kindergartners, that younger children might experience and express themselves spiritually. What I found too is that this was happening in everyday experiences for the children. And again, the classroom and the teacher were not supporting or encouraging spiritual expressions, spiritual experiences, and yet I was observing them in the classroom. I was observing the children enacting them without having to be told or prompted to do so. So it was happening in their everyday experiences, and it was just occurring spontaneously in the classroom. So in my study, I would not necessarily disagree with Tobin Hart, but I wouldn't label spirituality as the secret spiritual life of children. I think to me, it seemed more than evident that the children were being spiritual. It was just a matter of looking for it, of being there and observing what was happening through a spiritual lens, and not, say, labeling as social, emotional, or moral development. Okay, so we looked at these theories, and we know that these are proposed as theories in the classroom. So the next question I typically get is, yes, I think this is great, but what about the separation of church and state? So because we have the separation of church and state, teachers tend to think that what that means is that we can't talk about religion in schools. And to some extent, that is true, because we can't proselytize about religion in schools, meaning that we can't tell children that one religion is better than the other, or that they should believe a certain set of dogmatic tenets. That we can't do. We're forbidden by the law to do that. But the separation of church and state also says that we should not infringe or prohibit the free exercise of religious beliefs in our children, which is why we should also be prohibited to tell a child, for example, that they can't wear a hijab to school, or that they can't wear a cross to school, or that they can't pray before they eat at school. That is prohibited as well. Children have the right to be able to freely exercise and express their religious beliefs. Another thing that is interesting about the separation of church and state, and I'm going to read it here in this slide. Separation of church and state is paraphrased from Thomas Jefferson and used by others in expressing an understanding of the intent and function of the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause, right? So the Establishment Clause is the one that says that we cannot proselytize, and that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So we can't establish a religion that is the same for everyone, right? But the Free Exercise Clause is the part that says, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, right? So we cannot infringe upon people, and in our case, children's right to freely exercise, experience, and express their beliefs, right? And this is part of the First Amendment of the Constitution. So Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So again, it's not saying that we can't talk about religion in public settings. What it is saying is that we can't enforce upon others our own beliefs. We can't proselytize and try to convince others that our belief is the best one or the only one. And it also is saying that we shouldn't prohibit anyone to freely express their right to manifest, exercise, and share their own beliefs, whatever their beliefs are, right? Something interesting to note is this only talks about religion. It doesn't talk about spirituality. And we spent a lot of time trying to differentiate what spirituality was from religiosity or religion, right? And we know that spirituality does not necessarily confine itself to the tenets of religion or religiosity, of any religion or religiosity. So under those parameters, we could argue that the separation of church and state does not impede us as early childhood educators to support spirituality in the classroom for our students. And it shouldn't. It's not saying that we can't support it, and it's not saying that we can't respect it when it comes from the children themselves. Okay, so here are some scholars who have talked about spirituality in schools and how it can play out, right? This is a scholar, specifically Carpenter, referring to the separation of church and state. So she says, we should remember that not only do the courts forbid any action by government schools not prompted by a secular primary purpose, or which would principally and primarily aid religion, they also forbid any that would inhibit it. So I would venture to say that when teachers are telling students, we don't talk about that here, or ask your parent, or we'll get to that later, just focus on math right now. They are inhibiting whatever question, whatever pondering the child is bringing up. And that schools definitely are a place where we could have those conversations, right? It would come from a secular perspective, and still we would not be principally and primarily aiding any particular religion. We would be opening spaces to discuss and converse about whatever the children are pondering or are asking questions about, right? Kessler says that the curriculum should integrate heart, spirit, and community with strong academics, and proposes that teachers need to welcome the soul into the classroom through a climate of respect and time for solitary reflection, to ponder questions of meaning and purpose, and to have that time be part of your daily routine, and have, even if you don't have time to include another activity, but to have that, say, snack time, lunch time, breakfast, if you have breakfast in your classrooms, to have that time be a time for community, for conversation, for reflection, for pondering questions, for talking about some deep ponderings that children might have that don't have a space to come out or to be addressed or to be entertained, because they don't necessarily have to be responded to. You don't have to have the answers to these questions, but at least have the space to pose the question and reflect on them with the children, right? To have that space to nurture that. So Ron Miller says that spirituality is nourished not through formal rituals in school by the quality, but the quality of the relationships that develop between the person and the world, right? So it's not necessarily about formal activities or experiences that we plan. It's about the relationship, the quality of the relationship that we have with our students. Sewer says that all teachers, regardless of what or who they teach, can identify appropriate spiritual experiences and consider components of the curriculum and conditions of the classroom instruction that are likely to evoke spiritual or transcendent experiences. And then Thierry asserts that a spiritual experience cannot be taught, but it can be uncovered, evoked, found, and recovered. I would venture to say it can also be remembered. So what can we do in schools to support our children? There are a few programs that already exist. So sfk.org, it's Spirituality for Kids, and it's a website and a non-for-profit organization that has a website with a lot of curriculum materials. The curriculum materials there are for children 8 to 12 years of age. but they're there. They are linked to Common Core state standards, so they're easy to adapt and introduce into your own curriculum if you would want to do that. The Calm Classroom is an initiative that started in Chicago and in Illinois, and it's developing a mindfulness program through meditation in the classroom, through exercises, body scans, and it was done in Chicago public schools with a really good learning outcomes that were stemming from them. Holistic Life Foundation is a non-for-profit organization here in Baltimore City. One of the founders of it actually was studied at UMBC at some point in his academic career. And what they have a program called the Mindful Moment, and it's a program that they've implemented in Baltimore City public schools, and they've taken it outside of the city to other counties and other states as well. It's a really good program in which an instructor that's been trained in mindfulness through meditation goes into the classroom and teaches this to the children. There's also, in some schools, they have a classroom that is dedicated to the Mindful Moment program. And children go to this classroom and they have props, and they teach them how to meditate to promote mindfulness. It also has had great outcomes for learning and for academics, but it's also contributed to less to retention in schools, to less dismissals, less expulsions in schools. And the Calm Classroom in Chicago has led to lower rates of incarceration for adolescents in the Chicagoland area. So all of these programs have really positive outcomes for children, not just academically, but through their relationships with others and just the quality of their overall life. So in one of the in my book that I wrote with Miss Escarfuller, the 2024 book, she talks about how she incorporates spirituality in her second grade classroom. So she looks at explaining her pedagogy, but also then how that pedagogy plays out in the classroom. So she talks about having a peace corner, a peace flower. She talks about how she establishes norms, community norms at the beginning of the school year, and how she has different sets of materials that are going to help the children engage with the content, with each other, with the classroom environment and the materials in a way that is much more spiritual. Mrs. Escarfuller comes from a Montessori training background, so you can see it in the materials that she has in her classroom. They're sort of Montessori based. So that I'm sure you'll enjoy those chapters in that book where she goes through that. Other resources that you can use are children's books. So there's a lot of children's books that have spiritual themes under them or within them that are secular, that are non-religious spiritual themes. So If Nathan Was Here is a really nice book. It's a little bit sad because it's I think it's a kindergarten classroom that one of its friends passes away. So one of the children dies, and it's how the teacher deals with and processes the grief of losing a friend, and how the children also process the grief of losing a friend. So that's really good for those kinds of situations. So some of these books are going to be really good for purposeful activities, right? When something happened in your classroom and you find a book that hits it on the nail, right? That really addresses the topic that is going on in your classroom. Others are just books that can open up conversations of what spiritual topics that we can talk about, that we can discuss, that we can ponder, right? So the Be Kind or I Am Peace. The I Am Peace is a series. I am love, I am peace, I am, I think Mindful is one. Zen Shorts, also stories that have that have a lesson in them, that have a moral in them, and then you can ponder about these with the children. The Bat Boy and His Violin also is about, following your dreams and becoming who you're like born to be. The Golden Rule that applies to any relationship that we have in life, do unto others how we want to do unto ourselves. So that also is one that but all of these books and many more. So I've attached under week 3 a list of children's books that you can refer to that have to do with these spiritual topics. So these are some of the resources. I have some of these in my office. If you want to borrow any of these materials, I have some of these materials that you can borrow and you can use with your students. So the activity for this week is going to be for you to define spirituality and share it in the discussion board. So think about, what does spirituality mean to you? How do you understand, feel, live, and or grow in your spirituality? And then, as creatively as you want to be, put this down on a piece of paper and then scan it and upload it to Blackboard. And don't forget to look at your classmates' definitions of spirituality and comment on them. I'll be looking for them as you post them, and we'll comment on them as well. So remember to do this week and post it on Blackboard on the discussion board. You can, again, be as creative as you want. You can write a poem if you want. You can do a drawing or a picture, symbols. You can include words and images. You can do a collage if you don't want to, if you don't feel particularly artsy in your or skilled in your drawing. However you want to share it with us, just share what spirituality means to you. How do you understand, feel, live, express, grow in your spirituality? And then post it onto the discussion board. So EdTPA, we're focused on task 1 this week. And for task 1, you need to have collected your video permission forms, or be clear on who can be recorded, video recorded, and who cannot. Work on your contents for learning, so you should have that completed by this week. And read the Making Good Choices document on EdTPA. If you have any difficulties with finding the links, just email me and I will point you in the right direction of where you can find the documents if the links are not working. Read task 1 through 3 and all the rubrics from the Early Childhood EdTPA handbook. So make sure that you're clear on what task 1, which is what we're focusing on right now, entails, but read it all and read all the rubrics so that things sort of make sense to you. And then start drafting your lesson plans for the teaching portion. So task 1 is planning, right? So start drafting your lesson plans. If you need to talk to your mentor teacher about when you're going to teach and which kinds of lessons does she suggest or things that are best for you to teach, you need to do that this week. And have sort of a plan of what sequence of 3 to 5 lessons or 3 to 5 hours of instruction, the equivalent, is what you're going to teach. That's going to be your sort of your block schedule, your block planning, that sequence of lessons. And that's, again, it's going to serve for EdTPA, and it's also going to serve for the block plan assignment for seminar. So that's it in terms of EdTPA. I know it's a lot, but I think that if you pace yourself and work and follow the checklist for week 1, 2, and 3, and make sure that now that we're on week 3, you are where you should be in terms of the task that you need to be working on, you should be okay. Okie doke. So this week we're introducing meditation technique number 3. And meditation technique number 3 is both on Blackboard and on my website. So if you go to drjenmata.com, you click on Spirit Lab, it'll take you and you'll see all of the meditation techniques are there. But I've also downloaded them from my website and posted onto Blackboard. So under week 3, you'll find the meditation technique for week 3 that you can practice. So for homework, complete the readings for week 3. So there's some chapters from Hart's book, Tobin Hart's book. There's some chapters from my book from 2015, and there's some chapters from my book from 2024 for you to read. Continue working on EdTPA task 1 with all the things that we went over just now. Practice meditation techniques 1, 2, and 3. Or others. If you listen to one, you've listened to 1 and 2, and you listen to 3 now, and neither of them jive with you, then look for other meditations that you can, if you want to do a guided meditation, or if you just want to sit with, your breath for 5 minutes and have you go through it and not listen to anybody, you can do that too. As long as you're practicing and sitting for meditation a few times a week, you'll be doing the task assigned. Again, you don't have to do 1, 2, and 3, but my idea is that my intent is that each week I introduce you to a new technique, a new meditation technique, and that one of these techniques, or maybe several of these techniques, will jive with you, right? You'll like them, and you'll be able to continue practicing and doing them. And then lastly, post your definition of spirituality on the discussion board for week 3. Module opens up on Monday at 7 a.m., closes on Sunday by midnight. So make sure that you go in and you post your work and then go back in and see the work of others and comment so that we can have a discussion going on. I'm looking forward to seeing your definitions. That's all for now. I'll see you on Blackboard.